If you study for 18 hours a day and go and live in the country for 5 years, anyone can do it. How do we make language learning part of our lives while we have normal lives?
You can't just jump in and start watching a TV show and get much out of it. That's the ugly secret for a lot of people that propose. Just immerse yourself.
Well, welcome back to the StoryLearning podcast. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be conducting the very first interview of this new refreshed podcast. I am with none other than my good friend, John Fotheringham. John, welcome to the StoryLearning podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
And I think we should probably start by telling the story of your podcast, actually, because it was the very first podcast I was ever on.
I didn't know that, actually. That's news to my ears.
Well, you must have known it was one of the first. What's your recollection? Let's start with that. What do you remember from the heady days?
I do remember you reaching out, and I hadn't heard of you before. So yeah, it must have been early days, because now everybody that has an internet connection or has been to a bookstore knows the great Ollie Richards, of course. But yeah, I did not know that was your debut. Nor did I know that Master Japanese was the first digital product you'd ever sold. I heard that on some podcast interview with you years ago, and I thought, what? You never told me that.
That's right. Let's put some flesh on the bone here, some context. Back in the day, it was called the Language Mastery Podcast, I believe.
Yes. So I think it was, the Language Mastery Show, I think. And then I've since changed from Language Mastery to Anywhere Immersion. But
yes,
we'll
that's
get
right.
to that later.
We will get to that. And I mean, I first discovered you because you sold some incredible products on learning Mandarin and Japanese, which was very much my thing at the time. So maybe let's just start back at the beginning. Who is John? What does John do? What should people know about John?
Well, I'm still trying to figure that out. And at the ripe old age of 45, I'm wondering if I'll ever figure that out. So my background is in linguistics, but I've also done lots of other strange things. Very interested in martial arts. I play bike polo, which is like horse polo, but on bikes. And there's usually less poop, usually. I lived in Japan a couple of years. That's one of my probably best memories, and one of the best ways to figure out how much Japanese you don't know is to go to Japan very quickly. So, as you know, having been there as well. Also lived in Taiwan for a number of years, but most of my life has not been there. It's been trying to figure out how to both maintain and then learn other languages from here in the States. So that's kind of where the whole Anywhere Immersion thing came from, is like, how do you learn a language if you're not in the country or plan to go, but you want to hit the ground running? Because having been to countries where I either didn't speak any of the language or only knew enough to get in trouble, it became very clear how useful it is to actually be able to communicate enough, at least to feed yourself and hopefully not end up in jail.
Yeah, which is the second half of the story that we won't go into in the podcast, right?
Yeah, the statute of limitations, I think, have passed. So
yeah, it's passed. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So we're all in the language learning game. We learn language, we teach languages, we make content about languages on the internet. And I do find it interesting, having been doing this now for almost 13 years, which is not as long as you. I'm still in like sort of pre-teenage years in that sense. But I think what you described there is very interesting, because so much of what you tend to see online about language learning is kind of, all right, well, if you study for 18 hours a day and go and live in the country for 5 years, anyone can do it. Yeah. And it's like, yes, that's true. But it's like anyone can get to the moon if you happen to have the entire United States, NASA and the government backing you. Yeah, anyone can do it. Right. But then as we do this for longer, as we get older, invariably we tend to settle down. We tend to go back to the country where we're from. And this is what happens to most people. And we're kind of stuck with we come face to face with the reality that for most of us, if we want to learn new languages or keep learning languages, we cannot just pick up and go and live in the country for 5 years. And nor do we want to, because we have a nice life and we don't want to disrupt
nor do you need to.
I
guess is the big point I always come back to.
Yes. Although I think you don't need to, absolutely. But I think there is still, certainly for me, I still have these kind of romantic notions of, I would just love to just disappear off into the Japanese countryside for 5 years.
Sure.
And then I'll finally learn that all those verbs I never learned. The reason that I wanted to talk to you was because I think what you're dealing with now is the reality that most people live in. How do we make language learning part of our lives while we have normal lives and we're not studying for 18 hours a day or disappearing off to Japan? So what is Anywhere Immersion? It's a great name, by the way, because it does exactly what it says on the tin, like any good name should.
Right. I learned that from you, actually. I should give credit where credit's due, because you had also rebranded from I Will Teach You a Language to StoryLearning, and then now it's very clear what it is. But
then I learned this from Benny initially with Fluent in 3 months. Okay, cool. You know what you're getting.
You know what it is, right?
So,
which with language mastery, it didn't feel like, what is mastery? I mean, we can talk all day long about what that is, and I found out the hard way that people tended to assume I was expecting and promoting this perfectionism, and you have to be this super high level in a language for it to count. And that is exactly the opposite of my philosophy. I'm much more practical and good enough for what you want to do in the language. So
Anywhere Immersion. Give us the
Anywhere Immersion,
the TLDR.
Yeah. So it's basically, no matter where in the world you happen to live and no matter what language you want to learn. I mean, I happen to focus on Japanese and Mandarin most, but really the method or the philosophy works for any language. The idea is that as you go through your day, whatever it is you're doing, if you work a job, if you have kids, if you're commuting, doing chores, exercising, throughout your day, as much as possible, you're trying to make sure that everything you're hearing, seeing, writing, and saying are in that language. Now, obviously, there are different levels of this, and there's ideal, and then there's likely. I usually tell people to start with an hour as a goal per day, so an hour of total immersion. So whether that's reading content, listening content, or chatting with an AI bot or a tutor or something like that, try to get about an hour a day. I think that's a good target. And when I first started my stuff back in 2009, it was much, much more difficult to do that. Nowadays, it's the opposite problem. There's so much.
Yeah.
It's a matter of being more decisive and intentional about what you decide to stream on Netflix or what books you decide to buy or what podcasts you decide to subscribe to. I think less is better typically, so you can focus on a few things. It's very easy to get into kind of an accumulation trap where you keep getting more and more and more stuff, and it just either sits on your shelf or sits unopened on your device. The perfect content you never consume is not useful, right? Much better to pick one or two things that you actually will go through. Like pick one Netflix show, for example, and then watch it all the way through instead of trying to pick the top 10 or whatever that you're going to watch.
It is so interesting, isn't it? The psychological effect of going from foreign language resources being so scarce to being completely inundated by choice. Because I still remember when I decided to learn French in the year 2000, and I was working in this coffee shop in central London and surrounded by all these people from different countries who spoke English, and I felt really bad that I didn't speak their language. So I said, right, I'm going to learn French. I was like, right, how am I going to learn French? And there was one bookstore in Soho in central London. It was called I think it was called the European Bookstore. And there was basically nowhere else that you could get any language stuff. So, I mean, there was all the commercial stuff that you could get in the main bookstores. But I remember going down to this one bookstore in Soho, and that was the only place where there was a selection of French grammar books. Later, they ended up moving to Kensington. And I remember schlepping across London to go to this bookstore because it was the only place I could get stuff. And but it had the effect of when you did find a book and you got it, it was a valuable thing. You cherished that book and you worked all the way through it. But now, like you say, it's a different problem. You've got so much stuff, and everyone's got these different methods. It's such a strange phenomenon. You'd think that with an abundance of resources, we'd all be fluent in 7 weeks, right? Because there's just so much stuff out there. But there is that choice is so difficult. So how do you go about choosing what is? Because everyone's at a different stage, right? How do you judge whether a resource is the right one for you?
Yeah, I think there's two main filters that you should use. So one is obviously level, and then the other is interest. And these two they're not independent variables. So in general, you want to try to pick content that's obviously just right above your current level, enough that it pushes you, but not so crazy hard that it overwhelms you and you quit. That said, if you're super interested in a topic, then you tend to be able to handle stuff a little bit probably beyond your level. If it were on a topic that you didn't care about, you'd quickly give up. But the fact that like you're so passionate about it, you can usually, deal with stuff that's a little harder. So those are the two filters.
Yeah. It is easy to overdo that though, isn't it? Because I think I've probably been guilty in the past of saying like, oh, if you're really interested in it, you'll consume anything. But that's not true, because if it's too hard for you, it's too hard for you, like full stop. It doesn't do anybody any good taking 3 hours to work through one page of a book with a dictionary, even if, however interested you may be.
That's true. Right. Which, I mean, that goes to another, I think, really important point, which I know you do talk about in your books, which is the idea of extensive versus intensive reading. I think a lot of people, I've noticed this, especially with people learning Japanese and Mandarin, it seems to attract these kind of masochistic people. And they spend way too much time. And I definitely have been and continue to be guilty of this, of spending too much time looking up things you don't know. To your point, spending hours just on a page or two, that's not going to get you very far. That's just not a great strategy. That's intensive reading. It has its place, but I think in general, you should aim toward extensive reading where you're going for volume. You're going for understanding the gist of something, getting through a chapter, getting through a book, instead of trying to understand every single darn word that you don't know, or every grammar point you don't get, or every character that you're not quite sure about. Easier said than done. I do think one of the ways I've found to prevent myself from being too intensive is sticking to paper books over digital books. I mean, despite the preponderance of digital tools and media we have today, which they have their advantages, they're great, but honestly, good old fashioned paper, I think paper is still powerful. And I still, most of the time, if I'm going to read a book in Japanese, I'll get the physical version.
Really?
Another pro tip is I'll get a book that I've read already in English. So I know the context. I know what the basic story is about. And that way it's much easier to keep going.
Yeah. And for those of you listening to the audio version of this, John was holding up the English and Japanese version of Atomic Habits. I guess I'm unsurprised that that's one of your favorite books.
It is unsurprising, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, the analog thing is interesting, because I mean, I completely agree with you on that. If the only thing that reading the paperback book achieves is that it gets you to focus, then great, job done. But there is a particular advantage with reading digitally, isn't there? Which is that you can just look stuff up so quickly.
Right.
And I find this when I'm reading in Japanese, I've actually given up reading analog, because the frustration involved in not being able to read a kanji or being able to look up a word is such that I would rather read on the Kindle and be able to do like a one-click lookup, because precisely, to your earlier point, I want to optimize for extensive reading as much as possible. And I don't want to be slowed down by stuff that I don't know. Now, nor do I want to be sitting there clicking every word, which is the risk, but it's just the friction involved in looking up words in languages with difficult scripts is just so great that on the balance of practicality, I tend to go back to digital reading for that.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think you just have to know yourself, know what your tendencies are. And I think for myself, given my inclination and my idiosyncrasies, or idiosyncrasies, as I've heard some people call it, I look up too many things too darn often, and it gets me stuck in that mode. So I found this kind of prevents it. But there is the middle ground too, which is using your camera on your iPhone. You could always just scan the text on the page and then look at it that way.
I remember trying that, and then 3 hours later, I realized I was on YouTube or WhatsApp or something like that.
Like, wait a minute, what happened here?
Yeah. Okay. So immersion, yes, that's a topic that I think anyone who's listened to this podcast for a while is kind of familiar with. But
yeah,
I'm guessing that you would not say that immersion by itself is enough.
No.
So talk to me about
it's necessary but not sufficient.
Yeah. So place immersion on the overall chessboard of language learning for me, and tell me how it's moving around and which direction.
Yeah. I think it is or should be the biggest piece on the chessboard. I mean, I think it's the queen, as it were, but you do need to have those other pieces too, and they all work together. And I think that is a common mistake, and that's something I've seen people do is they'll just immerse, but they never actually make the next step of processing or repeating or practicing the stuff that they've been immersing in. If you just watch TV and you don't understand it, for example, that's not going to get you very far. If you just read something and you don't understand it, that's not going to get you very far. So I do think sprinkling in a tiny little bit of language study goes a long way. The key being that is that rests upon the immersion foundation. I think most people, when they learn language, it's the other way around. They're spending 80-90% of their time studying. They're memorizing rules, looking up, doing just flashcards with no context, and very, very little actual direct practice of the skill they want to learn. Because let's face it, most people say, I want to learn to speak Japanese, right? I want to learn to speak Spanish. They're not saying I want to learn to know lots of words in Spanish. And so the directness of the thing is super critical. And so when I think of immersion, I'm not just thinking of listening and reading. I'm also including active output too. I'm thinking speaking, I'm thinking writing. So ideally, you'd want about a 25, 25, 25, 25 mix of those four skills. Now, practically speaking, it's never going to be that. We know that. It's going to be probably 70% listening, 20%, 25% reading, and then maybe if you're lucky, you'll get 1% speaking and writing.
Yeah, so just to kind of recast what you said there, so ideally we want to be spending equal-ish time on different skills so that we get a broad exposure to the overall landscape of the language. But we're never going to be doing that. We're going to be spending most of our time on one thing. I guess the thing is that the one thing that we do end up spending our time on is most likely going to be the thing that is most comfortable for us or easiest for us, right? It's not like it's a deliberate choice where we're going to strategically say, right, I've decided I'm going to spend 83.5% of my time on listening this month. Most likely it's going to be, we're just watching Netflix because we're tired and we can't find anything interesting to listen to, and there's no Japanese person for 70 miles around us. So I suppose this is where the strategy comes in, right? Because we have to, it does take work to get exposure and practice across the whole spectrum of a language.
Mm-hmm. And to your point, the active skills take that much more work and effort. And you're opening yourself up to making mistakes and looking foolish, which is why I think for most people, especially if they're earlier on in their learning journey, I think that's where AI is the biggest advantage, the biggest helper. I think we might be the same on this. I think AI is a double-edged sword. I think it holds a lot of promise and a lot of help, but it's certainly not a panacea. And it should be, I think, used in concert with all these other things that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But when it comes to actually starting to speak or write and try to communicate in the language, I think it's a really good on-ramp toward speaking with actual humans. So not a replacement for, but it's an on-ramp toward.
Yeah. I want to take a quick detour on the inevitable road towards AI here, because we're going to get there. But how do you think about this? So we've got this combination of immersion and deliberate practice. Mm-hmm. How does this change for someone who's just starting a new language versus someone who is 3 years in and can already speak it? And how should one think about this differently depending on the level that they're at?
Yeah, that's a really good question and reminder, because I tend to get interested in and talk most about sort of people that are already further down that road of 2 or 3 years down in there. They already can understand a bit, can start to use authentic resources instead of.
But even people who can already speak a language start new ones, right? And
that's true. Yes, those of us that are addicted to the process. I do think if you are brand new or very early on, it is going to look much more like language learning as opposed to what I consider immersion. You can't just jump in and start watching a TV show and get much out of it, for example, if you're brand new. there are ways to do it where you're going to be able to make it a bit more comprehensible. There are lots of these cool browser extensions where if you're watching a Netflix show or a YouTube video, you can have interactive subtitles that can show you the English and also let you click on, within reason, click on new words. Of course, they're all going to be new to you and you're brand new. So I do think going at it a little bit deliberately in the early days, learning the most common 100 to 500 words using something like, but not necessarily Anki, can be helpful. It's not fun. And that's the thing, is immersion's fun once you have enough of the language in you that you can start to understand a bit. You can then start to actually read stuff and watch stuff and listen to stuff that you inherently enjoy. But that takes some front loading to get to that point. And that's kind of the ugly secret, I think, for a lot of people that propose, oh yeah, just immerse yourself, just watch TV. It's like, yes, eventually. But there is a part in the beginning where you have to do some of the less sexy, the less glamorous.
You're going to get further faster if you do a little bit of study. And then in terms of what that study is, I mean, are you a proponent of going through textbooks and courses, or is it more along the lines of kind of self-help, loading up words into flashcards and memorizing them?
Yeah.
How do you think about it?
A mix. I used to be very anti-textbook earlier on. I mean, when I first began my blog in 2009, I was teaching English in Taiwan, actually. And I saw sort of the dark side of English education and textbooks and how
there is a dark side. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I think I swung too far.
Yeah.
I think there is value in having things all laid out in one place. I think so long as you don't expect, I'm going to read this textbook and be able to both understand and utilize everything that was in that textbook. That's a false hope.
Yeah. I've become more and more of a fan of textbooks, actually, simply from the perspective that when you're first starting a new language, you don't know what you don't know, right? It's just a blank canvas, and with no breadcrumbs or guidelines anywhere for you to follow. So even if you were to do it all by yourself, you're still going to have to do the work of figuring out, what do I need to know here? So you start to learn Greek. I've got to learn the alphabet or the script, I suppose. And do I even know that there are multiple, noun genders here? And what about the grammar? There are all these things that you don't know. And so
Right.
you've got to figure that out one way or another. And the thing about a textbook or a course is that someone very smart has already done the hard work of curating all the most important things you need to know to get started in the language. So for me, it's kind of crazy that you wouldn't start there, if only to save yourself a whole bunch of time.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that highlights the important difference between a teacher and a tutor also, which I see as being different but complementary things. A teacher is that master, that person that understands the terrain and has arranged things in a way that will help you learn quickly. A tutor is somebody just helping you practice. And that's why a lot of tutoring can be done with AI, not to jump back to that again, but I think you need both. And if you are going to choose a teacher, I'm quite partial to non-native speaker teachers, at least in the very, very beginning, because they've been through what you're going through. They know where the roadblocks are. They know where the pitfalls are.
So
for
in your case, this would be, for example, an American woman who has learned fluent Japanese herself, and now you would go to her for lessons, for example.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Not exclusively. I mean, obviously, there's going to be things a native speaker is going to know and be better at than a non-native speaker. But I think for understanding the journey ahead, for having somebody lay out, okay, this is what you need to learn. Here's what's going to be really frustrating and confusing. Here's what's going to be easy and intuitive, because that's where I feel like a lot of native speaker teachers don't have an intuition about it. A lot of like Japanese people, for example, what they think is hard about Japanese is usually not the thing that's actually that hard for us, and vice versa.
Yeah. So we've been driving through the wilderness of language learning theory and technique and strategy, and then we are seeing the city looming on the horizon and these huge, great tower blocks just becoming bigger and bigger and bigger as we approach. And they've all got AI written all over them in huge letters. Yeah. So let's just go from the basics. What is AI and what does it mean for language learning at a very high level?
as it exists now, I actually think the name AI is a misnomer. It is not artificial intelligence. It is recycled human intelligence. So just as a philosophical tangent, it's very useful, I think, if used properly for language learning. I think the key point that I always try to drive home is it does not replace the need to learn languages, at least not yet.
What is
Someday
it? What can it do? Let's pretend that someone's been they see these AI ads pop up on their Facebook feed and they just immediately shut it down and in disgust and haven't contended with this thing that is AI at all. What are we talking about here?
So I think most people are going to have used or are most familiar with AI chat bots. And so these are things you can use in your native language as well. But in the language learning context, it's often, I want to practice speaking or writing Japanese, let's say. So I will type in Japanese to this chat bot, and then it will reply to me in hopefully some kind of grammatical, coherent way, and we'll have a conversation back and forth. Or I'll do speech and it will do the same back. I can ask it questions. It can point out mistakes in what I wrote or what I said. It can reword what I said in different ways. That's super useful. It can condense stuff. So I could paste in a big long paragraph of Japanese and say, please make this short and simple. Or, hey, please only use vocabulary from the JLPT N5 level, for example, if I'm a beginner. Things like that. So that's kind of the basics of it. There's way more you can do with it. There's tools like Teacher AI, which I know we both know and are friends with the creators. It's much more systematized and it's getting better all the time. And so instead of it just being, simple organic back and forth, you can have topics. It can keep track of words you've used, things that you made mistakes about. You can make flashcards. So there's a lot of potential. I do think there will come a time when it will get so good that it may seriously change people's desire to learn languages in the first place, when the translation part of it gets so good that it's basically instantaneous. I mean, you've already seen the ads from Apple, right? Where you have your AirPods in, somebody's speaking in Spanish, and it's translating it to English in your head. Personally, and I know I'm biased about this, that almost feels like a dystopian future to me. Like it creates this barrier between you. You have a device between you. You're not hearing their voice. You're hearing Siri's voice in your head. And so, yeah, sure, you can buy the thing you want at the market, but you didn't really make a human connection the same way that if you used your vocal cords, I think.
Let's linger on the actual tools themselves, which don't represent the kind of auto translators, because I think people are going to have instinctive reactions to putting a device into their ear which automatically translates anything that anyone says. I think that's I mean, for a start, that's a way off still being practically useful, I think.
Right.
But also, it's going to divide people like Marmite. But in terms of the actual language tools, so, you've talked about how it can reformulate text and it can translate and it can speak back to you. I mean, this has all the hallmarks of, we spoke earlier about how the internet has given us so much choice that we now don't know what to do with it. The way you described AI is, worryingly similar in that it can do everything, but what do we actually want it? What do we actually want it to do? So what are the kind of most useful practical applications that we've seen with this? And perhaps you could discuss, is it something akin to going on ChatGPT and actually using it yourself and telling it how you want it to respond? So you're the puppet master of the learning experience, or is it tools that have been designed specifically for language learning where you just do one thing?
Right. So I'm going to start with the last one, then go backwards.
Okay.
So I use ChatGPT, I use Claude, I use Gemini, making them do what I want to do, but that does take a bit of know-how of how to make prompts that work, how to get the kind of output you want to get.
And what's an example of something that what would you ask it to do? For an example, what's something you've done in the last week? You open up Gemini. What do you type in?
I think there's three main use cases that come to mind. Number one is, what's the difference between A and B? So there'll be like two words in Japanese, for example, that I know what they mean, they both, if you look them up and you translate it, they'll have the same translation in English. And so I'll ask it, what is the nuanced, subtle distinction between these two words? Give me example sentences using each. And for me, I hate it. By default, it'll use like romaji, the English letters. So no, give me kana or just kanji. I don't want romaji. Give me practical example sentences, things that, are taken from authentic content if possible, and give me the audio so I can hear it pronounced.
Okay. So it's like you're using it like as if you were texting your teacher.
Correct. Yeah, that's a good, TLDR. Another really useful thing, which I kind of already mentioned, is find my mistakes. So like, I'm about to write this email to somebody in Japanese. My Japanese is decent, but I still make mistakes all the time. I'm good enough to know I'm not that good, right? So like, tell me, where are my mistakes in this? What wrong particles did I use? Where did I use wa when I was supposed to use ga, right? For example, find those for me, point them out. Or how would you say this differently? What's a more natural way to say this? Like, it might technically be grammatical and probably a native speaker would understand what I mean, but it's not what they would say. What would a Japanese person actually say in this context? Tell me that. So that's use case 2. Use case 3, which is something I'm increasingly doing, is resources, finding me resources. Find me a nice YouTube channel, right, that talks about Japanese gardening in Japanese. Find me, are there any good Netflix series available in the US about XYZ topic that I'm interested
So it's like the language learning equivalent of like, I've got half a pound of pork and 3 spring onions in my fridge, make me a recipe.
Right.
What can I
Which is great at that too. Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, okay, cool. So it's a mix of what we might call repair. So it's like, tell me what's wrong with what I'm doing, and then discovery. So I'm looking for this, help me find it. That's fantastic. And I think this is something that anybody can do. I think often it just doesn't occur to people that you can do this because it's a new thing. We're not used to, based on the last 20 years of the internet, going to Google and saying, correct my sentence, because Google Translate, all right, it's okay, but it's not all that, although it's much better than it was. And how about specific tools then? Is there anything that you found, is there any AI tools that have become like indispensable in your routine?
I've tried many. Almost every app you could think of now has some kind of AI integration. I think for the way I learn and the way I promote learning, I think Teacher AI is probably the best now from what I've seen in terms of getting you to actually practice, but having just enough structure and feedback on mistakes and being able to make flashcards from the thing. I think that's the best out there. I'm sure there'll be others soon that do similar things. They've also just lowered the price. That was kind of one of the main beefs I know people had with it, was for what it is. Some people didn't feel like it was worth the monthly price tag. I think it was, personally, but now it's even more affordable. So I think that'd be the first. There's a couple, I'm trying to remember. I think it's Boom Pro has some cool, I haven't used it in a while, but they had some cool AI integration for like grammar specific stuff.
All right. What did that do?
I think it was mostly just practice. Like you'd learn about a specific grammar pattern, and then they would have you practice writing out sentences, and they would correct your mistakes. So again, not really something that ChatGPT couldn't do.
But the thing that I find interesting, personally, I think some apps are probably starting to do this, but I think where I'm starting to see very useful applications is in software that can follow your progress as you go and create personalized material.
Yes.
Right. 100%. So as you're learning a language and you learn more vocabulary, okay, now you can get personalized exercises that either use that vocabulary you've learned or don't use it and learn new stuff instead. Right. So it can kind of adapt with you as you go in such a way that it couldn't before, because previously there was always a fixed amount of content or exercises, right? If you made a piece of software, I mean, Duolingo, for example, that everybody has used at least once, in the past, the only thing it could give you is a course or activities that someone had inputted into the software. Right. Someone had to make that, right? But what AI allows for is for that to be personalized, so we can generate new activities based on where you are at in your progress. And I think that's something which if done well, could be very exciting because it's just adaptive. It follows you and follows your progress. But that's not something that you could do with ChatGPT because it's just it's too open. It's just too open,
Right. You need some guardrails. And I will say I haven't used it much, but Duolingo is starting to integrate some cool AI stuff. I mean, they have like phone call mode, for example, now where you can literally basically call. I'm doing air quotes for people listening. You can call one of the Duolingo characters and have a conversation, and it will respond based on what you say within some constraints, obviously. And so it is going the right direction. I mean, that is starting to address what historically were my biggest criticisms of Duolingo, is that it was it's very well gamified. It's great for habit formation. It's great to keep you showing up, but it's so divorced from the actual skills you want to be able to do in a language that it's kind of like, what's the point, right?
Yeah. Yeah. My favorite, I just saw a tweet. I'm just looking here on my computer to see if I can actually find it. I probably won't be able to off the cuff, but it was a tweet that went viral a few weeks back. It got something like 7 million views. And it was a guy basically writing, here we go. I've got it. So a guy writes, this is Anon Opin, at Anon Opin on Twitter, says, my father has a 1,200 plus day Spanish streak on Duolingo. So that's like 4 years of daily Spanish. We went on holiday to Spain recently and he could hardly string 2 sentences together. What the F is the point of that app? 3.4 million views as of the 27th of November. So anyway, not to make this about Duolingo, but
no,
we should use anytime, anywhere instead.
Yes, please.
Although I should probably get that right. It should be Anywhere Immersion rather than anytime, anywhere. Anytime, anywhere.
You got the tagline. Yeah.
Anytime, Anywhere Immersion, anytime, anywhere.
I think my tagline, learn any language, anywhere, anytime. I think that's the,
There we go.
I remember. I haven't looked at it in a few while. Yeah.
John, this has been a tour de force through modern language learning. Thank you for just sharing all of that perspective. It's super interesting. Where can people go and find out more about you and get Anywhere Immersion stuff for themselves? Hoodies, t-shirts, branded mugs.
Oh, I don't have those yet. I should get on that. AnywhereImmersion.com. That's my online home. The Language Mastery Show is still available. I haven't recorded any new episodes in
people should go back and listen to our episode from
I think we should. Well, actually, there's 3. So you were on 3 times. You were on, or 2 times. There was a 2-parter. But you were on, I think, in 2013 was it? And then I think 2022 maybe, or 2020. I forget. But we'll have to go back and see. Well, but maybe I should do one of these, do a video podcast. Maybe that's the next.
There we go. Step. Yeah, and
I do miss it.
It's just a great excuse to have a good conversation, isn't it? And
what's how we met?
I mean, exactly. And for people listening who are tuned into the audio, you may not know that you can watch the video of all of these new podcast episodes on Spotify and on YouTube as well. So you get to see what John actually looks like. And
I don't recommend that. I mean, you want to see what Ollie looks like, not me.
John, thanks so much. And we will undoubtedly speak again soon.
Cheers. Thanks for having me. That was fun.